Today on In the House, we sit down with Christian Klein of Drophouse Design. Drophouse is a steel fabrication shop and is responsible for producing amazingly complex yet beautifully crafted designs. Christian and his team showcase their passion and artistry in every project. We talk about Christian's background in naval architecture. We discuss business development and the effect of AI in the design industry. We hope you enjoy this conversation, and thanks for listening. Today on In the House, we have Christian with Drophouse Design. And I think if you're a contractor in the Austin area and you haven't heard the name Drophouse, you've probably been living under a rock. So, Christian, I want to open up the floor to you. I want to kind of get an understanding of who you are and how Drophouse came to be and, you know, what it is you do and, you know, just give us your story.
Gotcha. I'd say it's definitely been a evolving idea. You know, we're about 11 years in now, and I come from an architecture background, and original goal was to do design build, and we dabbled in a couple of full design builds, mostly small residential stuff way back in the early days, and then it kind of evolved more into custom fabrication. And originally we did wood and steel, as well as some other mixed media, but we were probably split pretty evenly between commercial and residential. And then over the years, it kind of evolved into really specialty metalwork. And then we do everything from structural to architectural and everything in between.
Yeah.
Really just kind of take on a mix. The fun stuff, really the kind of more challenging ones are the ones we look for at this point. If we haven't seen that before, then that's enticing.
That's awesome.
If it looks challenging, then those are the more fun ones.
I think that's what I like about y'all stuff, because it's definitely, like you said, it's you want the challenge, where I think a lot of people are more risk averse, and it's like, no, we'll pass on that. But I think y'all definitely kind of grab the bull by the horns and y'all do some pretty phenomenal stuff. And I've been watching y'all's work for a few years now, and it never ceases to amaze me. And everything y'all do is awesome. So. But you said you had a background in architecture. Can you kind of go into a little bit about that?
Yeah, basically started my undergrad in naval architecture and marine engineering. So right out of high school, I started at a small college up in New York that you graduated in 4 years with a double major in naval architecture and marine engineering. So it was a pretty intense workload. It was a really small university. Basically, the guy was a shipping magnate at the turn of the 19th century, and he left an endowment for a school. And so it was an old mansion right on Long Island Sound. There was about 85 people total that went there. Everybody went on scholarship. And then every January and February, you went out to work. So the first year, they send you to go work in a shipyard, see how they're built. Second year, they send you out on board a ship, see how they're operated, and then third and fourth year, you'd go to a design office and start to get down to the nuts and bolts of it. And so I did that for a couple of years, hopped off a boat in Port Sulphur, Louisiana, and spent a couple months in New Orleans after I decided, okay, this is not the spot for me. Worked for a while as a short order cook, and then moved back to DC, worked on the river for a while. I was working on my 200-ton inland waterways captain's license. And then I was like, all right, I did that for about 6 months. And I was like, all right, if I don't go back to school now, I never will. And that took me down to New Orleans and UNO. And so I did that for a while longer. While I was there, I was working at the shipyard across the river doing construction management. And so adjacent to architecture, but not quite the same. And was there until Katrina chased me to Austin, and not a lot of shipbuilding jobs here. So I ended up doing fabrication, worked for a sign shop that did most of interior signage for Whole Foods. And that's really where I learned to weld and fabricate. And then decided to go back to school, went back to Louisiana to LSU and got my MArch there. So I did the 3-year master's program. And then met my wife there, who's also in architecture, and we moved over here so she could work on her post-professional at UT. was either here or Columbia, and that was right when the market crashed. She graduated, and it was gravy. And then about 6 months later, I got to watch it go off the cliff. And still waiting to get out of school, and so I knew that's what I had waiting for me. She had been, her firm at 20 had been, I think they laid off 15. It just like wholesale carved up the market at that point. So that was a little daunting. Just spent 3 years, going back to school, and that's what you're faced with. So we ended up moving over here because it was a better option than New York. I didn't think I could survive New York again during a downturn. Yeah. It just didn't seem to make a lot of sense. So we got over here, and I did kind of odd job fabrication for a bit. Was partners in another fab shop. The guy I had worked for previously at the sign shop, he'd started up his own shop. And so I worked with them for about a year and a half. And then we got the opportunity to go teach architecture in India. So we went over there for about a year and came back, and then tried looking for an architecture job again. Couldn't find one.
In India?
Yeah.
That's cool. So like just exposure to kids and telling them about architecture, or like?
I mean, it was college level kids. So I taught both undergrad and a grad studio. Also taught fabrication, primarily to the undergrads. Which was fun. We had to go shopping for all the tools to outfit the workshop, and we actually went to a couple of towns within like an hour and a half or two, and just went right to the factory. And they're like, "Oh, here are the ones for local production. Oh, those are the really bad ones. We're sending those over to China. These are the ones we send to Europe. Like these are the ones, when they're making vices and that kind of stuff." And we went and bought a drill press at one shop, and then we had to go to another shop to buy the motor, and then we had to build a mounting plate. So there's kind of some fun challenges. You couldn't find a welding hood anywhere over there. So just kind of learning through some of that stuff. And while we were there, we took the students down to Mumbai, to Dharavi, the largest slum in Asia, and it's just amazing. When left to their own devices and minimal resources, like what people will engineer out of thin air, and doing what you have to survive. But I think there was 1 million people that lived in that settlement, and so that just kind of
so heavily populated over there.
Yeah, and that's in a city of like 35 million. So. But yeah, in an area not much bigger than like the footprint of like the property the shop's on. It's just kind of wild to think about. But the ingenuity you saw was like really inspiring. And so got back, and there still were no architecture jobs, but I had work lined up. So I started to shop, and then not long after, my partner joined me. And
when was that? What year was that?
Like 2012.
About when I got here. When'd you get here?
I got here in 16. Yeah. My wife was, north of here, so it wasn't, too far for her, but I wasn't familiar with the Austin area until 16. So
where'd you move in from?
I came to Austin right out of College Station. I graduated at A&M, but I came here right out of College Station because work brought me here. Thanks to Mr. Adrian over there. So Naval Architecture. What is that?
It's basically like ship
design.
Yeah, ship design and construction.
Interesting.
So a lot less orthogonal than buildings, at least until you get above the waterline.
I'm not gonna lie, I didn't even know that was a thing. I guess it makes sense because somebody has to design the ships. But
how much does beauty play into that? How much does making an object that is beautiful play into that? Now,
a lot of it depends on which end of the spectrum you're working in. If it's oil patch and you're designing a jack-up oil rig, not a whole lot. It's purely functional. Or a cargo ship, and then you get into like the sailing yachts and America's Cup kind of boats, and that turned out that's the stuff I thought about going into school. It's the very pretty end, and it turns out that segment of an already really small market is super narrow. So I think our class, there's only 5 schools in the U.S. that offer that specific degree. and our school, Webb was one, UNO was another one. UNO's graduating class was like maybe 30 a year. Webb was like maybe 15. So you add that up around 5 schools. It's not a ton of people every year.
Seems proportionate to the scale of jobs that are out there, though. It's not like there's so much need for that.
So maybe 1 or 2 out of every class would luck out and get into yacht design, but that was a pretty narrow field that people kind of held on to. So like for example, I was working on government contracts primarily. We were working on LPD, the amphibious landing craft, and that kind of stuff. So less pretty and more functional. But I mean, it was amazing. You'd see a 500-ton lift out in the yard as they're moving like a grand block. Something we would think of as a building as a part of the ship, as they would typically build the ship in segments inside the warehouse. They're really kind of far ahead in terms of like modular and assembly and planning and pre-construction and all that than we are with buildings. It's amazing, because everything would be split into compartments. An 800-foot ship is built in like 200 blocks, and they would pre-outfit those with plumbing and electrical and equipment, basically crane them up on the ways and then weld them out and assemble them. The cruise ships right now are being built like the rooms are all blocks. It's all prefab, and they just basically slide the room units into the side of the hull.
That's wild. Yeah, like Lego bricks, right? And just kind of stack all these units.
Yeah, and their version of like BIM was way advanced as compared to the architecture field. They were more akin to like aerospace, whereas they've been using they were using computer aided design way before architecture was, just because of the complexity. The vessels, it made sense to transition earlier.
It was hard to be on the cutting edge of that, and then to use that in naval architecture seems like it's got its own problems on top of something that's little. There's little to go out there to know how to do it.
The guy that I worked for at the shipyard, he was a cost and schedule consultant for the government. And he basically wrote his own software that would integrate the work order schedule, which had like 150,000 like discrete work orders like per ship. And each one of those would have about 50 data points like associated with it. And he could integrate that with basically their BIM system. And so he could reorder the erection sequence of the ship based on delays, based on like
streamlined it.
Compartments. It was amazing, but this we're talking about in like 2002, 2003. Revit was still like a few years away, and like architecture firms, there's like maybe ArchiCAD back then, but everybody was primarily still working in CAD. And so I came from that world, and then starting coming into architecture, I'm always like, man, there is no good software to like integrate between the two, especially schedule and.
I think SketchUp was around. Form Z was around. I don't know if you ever used that.
Yeah, there's some kind of interesting ones, but it was a little bit of a step back trying to figure out how to plan and schedule and integrate that. And everything I was used to was large scale. Like it would take too much to kind of implement some of that stuff and bring it back into the level of construction we were doing. It just wasn't worth it. But
so with BIM. It seems like the early adopters should have been like hotels and like these things that are replicated all over the world. And it's interesting that, the adopters were like, yeah, you use BIM, like you use modeling software to be able to model things. And I don't know if you use it to the extent of for like takeoffs, et cetera, but it's just interesting that, you're saying that the ships are being used for like the modeling software. They're using the software for its full potential, and in some ways driving that. And I would think that would be like the last sector to like adopt like BIM. It would be like more of the the high rises and the hotels of the world.
Yeah, I think when architecture started to recognize it, it definitely was on the bigger projects for stuff like that. But was it Katia or basically the program that like Gary used?
Yeah.
He stole it from shipbuilding because of the curves. When he started playing with that, he's like looked around and it's like, oh, well, there's already these guys over here doing this, and that's what I want to do. So he took that software, and and now we have our own native stuff. We're using Rhino instead, and that's built more specifically for what we do, and Fusion and stuff like that. It's come a long way in the last few years, especially. They're all finally starting to talk to each other a little bit better.
Yeah. Are you in there? Are you designing stuff in softwares? Or are you?
Not anymore.
Yeah.
That's a young kid's game to keep up with the software. I'll sketch but it's hard to stay current with all those. So no, that's what the office is for.
Yeah.
Right now we've got 6 in the office. We actually have 3 licensed architects. Whereas a typical steel fab shop, you might have a detailer or 2, but we kind of run heavy on that side.
Yeah, well, it's evident in your work. Yeah,
thanks.
How do you feel about the integration of artificial intelligence with architecture? Because this is kind of something that's, I think, up and coming. This AI. Do you see it as like a positive thing or negative? Is it going to destroy creativity, and people are going to rely more on AI to generate some of their designs? And what are your thoughts on some of this AI stuff coming out?
I think it depends on how people implement it.
Yeah.
Like anything, it can be used for good, or it can just churn out a bunch of garbage. If you're using it as an iterative tool, it's kind of like a pre-designed thing that feeds ideas into other things. It's potentially useful to break ground that we haven't gotten into before. But at the same time, it might just end up recycling and kind of spit out generic stuff. Yeah. So I think a lot of it is how good the initial user is and what their input is, and versus like what they're getting out and what they're doing with that output. If they're just taking output and passing it along, or if they're using it to actually case study a bunch of things, really find a better solution, and then tweaking and advancing that, then it's potentially taken a large amount of work, shrunk it to a smaller amount of work, so then you could spend more time on that last kind of final step, massaging it. So instead of exploring 2 or 3 potential ideas for a client for a new site, you could explore 20 or 50 or 100 and really get to a point where you might come up with a unique solution you might have missed on the front side. But I think it's understanding the tech and really being able to implement it well and use it, and that'll kind of define where it goes. It'll definitely change, I think, the nature of design in an office to some extent, and how it does that, how it allows you to ideate, but I don't think it wholesale removes the designer, nor should it. I think it should just be another tool in the box. And I think to some extent it's kind of inevitable. It's a little bit like it's out of the bag at this point. Yeah, I don't think it's going back. And so I think we learn to kind of use it along with other things as an aid, but not a replacement. What do you think?
No, I don't know. I agree with everything you said. I just think it's at first I'm sure the calculator was an aid, but now it's essentially replaced understanding arithmetic and different equations, because you can just use calculator. You don't really need to learn. My fear, I guess, is that AI would kind of squelch some creativity. Instead of relying on your own creativity, you're just plugging it into the computer and it's spitting something out. And I have a fear that that's the route that a lot of industries will go. But hopefully I'm wrong about that. I don't know, Mark, what's your take? You're an architect.
And use it in that vein, like everybody used to hand draft. They were bringing parallel bars to school, and then you had to learn how to hand draw and get your line weights right and know what a line's going to look like with an HB compared to 4B. And then we had computers. I'm sure they're probably scared of the computers. Oh my gosh, they're drawing lines and they're using a keyboard. Oh God, this is scary. And then,
that's fair.
Like in my undergrad, it was parametric softwares that were learning programming to be able to make these beautiful shapes that we can have an infinite amount of ideations of. And now it's this. And so I don't think that school's going to be like, all right, you guys are so dumb. We'll just tell a computer to remember what all these other designers did before you, and then you'll become a programmer, and then architecture school goes to programming or something. I think that we'll understand. You have to know history. You have to know like where we've been and why things are and the avenues people have gone to make these things and where they landed. And so I don't think that'll ever get displaced. I think that, like you said, it'll be just another tool that's in the toolbox.
I agree with your take. Yeah, I think hopefully it just stays that way where it's just a tool that you can implement. I think it would actually be cool. I was thinking about this the other day. If, I don't know, somebody a lot smarter than me could figure out how to use AI on maybe like budgeting and schedules, because that's, I don't know, I was thinking, the AI could kind of analyze a database of information as far as like budgeting is concerned, to where, all you have to do is upload some kind of document, whether it's a floor plan or an elevation or a whole set of drawings, and it could analyze and look at those, and maybe with a few more data points, like selections and materials, it could generate some kind of a budget based on the data that you've inputted. So I think that would be a useful tool. Maybe, hopefully somebody a lot smarter than me can figure that out. But I don't know. I see AI kind of being, beneficial in that regard.
Yeah, hopefully it eventually becomes more of a expedient, allowing us to get from point A to point B quicker with more information.
Yeah.
And it doesn't end up like dumbing down the profession. I definitely think it has the potential to go that way. Yeah. Unfortunately, this is the way I'd like to see it go, is be a tool and not like a replacement.
Like human nature is to always take the easiest way, the easiest route possible. And it's like, hey, I have this program that I could easily, just plug some data into, and it would kind of help solve this problem, or this, do my job for me and make it a lot easier. But I think it's, the principle of the matter is, I hope it just remains just a tool that's, that you could use, and not something that a crutch, that somebody leans on.
But I mean, if it's aesthetics, right, and it's an image that creates a beauty and it gets everybody's heart throbbing, and then some faker made it through AI, and then they show it. Like, at the end of the day, if it's going to be this constructed thing, it's going to be this built thing, there's going to be details you got to figure out of the thing.
Yes, so I think there's still
ingenuity of the human to be able to figure out how this goes together.
Yep.
So I think using it as a tool is a good thing, but I don't think that people then therefore are lazy. I think maybe they are, but they won't be successful because there's not ingenuity in figuring out what this thing is.
Agreed. Yeah.
Especially in the built world, it's one thing we're all accepting. You scroll through Instagram, and it's funny. The thing that gets me the most now is like cars, right? Because that's like one of my hobbies or passions, is like a side design. Just I like the scale of like the vehicle, but there's so much like AI generated stuff now, and I look at it and I'm like, man, if you're actually going to build that car, how would you do that? How would a custom fabricator get down to like actually the details and do that? And so now you've got this pile of things that's computer generated over here, and you're like, oh, that's pretty cool. But then there's the stuff that's actually built, that's gorgeous, that you're like, okay, and like, does there become a divide between the two, where AI kind of gets so far out here, to your point, where it's like the details are tough to get back to and to actually implement it. No, does it look like that? Not really, because we didn't think about it that way, and so that's why, hopefully that's kind of the gatekeeper, right? Because there'll always be that fluff over there, and there's always been renders and kind of pie in the sky ideas, but the build stuff is really what it comes down to at the end of the day, the real thing, the tangible thing. And so that'll always be somewhat of a gatekeeper for the just like garbage AI stuff, or the unattainable over here, is the category. Oh, can you actually make it? Did you make it? Cool. Okay.
Yeah, and I think that cycles of fashion, cycles of what it is versus what it is. I read an article about there's a show called Succession. You guys watch it? Anybody watch Succession?
I'm familiar, but yeah.
It's like they wear, they're like the ultra rich, and they wear like the nicest of clothes, and like they've had this resurgence of like not the loud tie-dye stuff, or I don't know, Jinkos are back in style now, and it's like going into like the back into the 90s and trend, and now there's this like cycle of like new, like everybody wants like the nicest things. I think that the cycles of design and what we want out of architecture is going to happen, and so I don't know if that'll influence AI's adoption. So if an AI kicks out all this stuff and everything is coming from the lens of what the robot says, which is what I guess we're putting into it, I don't know if it'll go back to I don't know, Frank Lloyd Wright, the Warriors, and like if we'll have this resurgence of mid-century being something. Just be interesting, like seeing what we're building today. Like your standard house is way different than what it was before, and there's like it's like you can tell, oh, that's a 2015 house and that's a 1980 house. Like perhaps AI will have an influence on that, and then I don't know. Who knows what this future holds?
I think that's something cool too about AI is that you could a positive side of it, I guess, is you could basically you could tell it, hey, design me a 2,000 square foot home, single story in the style of pick your architect, and it could spit out some plans that is in the style of whatever your favorite architect is, and I think the possibility of that could be pretty cool.
I think at the lower end in mass market application is probably the best bet, because rather than have a 1,000 home subdivision with 8 floor plans, because that's what we want to pay for, you let the AI generate 100 different floor plans, and then the framing are all CNC cut kits that go out, and the framers are slapping it up, but you save the money on the front end. You get some diversity into a project that otherwise wouldn't have had it. Mm-hmm. But on the other end of the spectrum, the high end, like custom residential stuff, like that's always, I feel like, going to be much more bespoke. Like that's what they want. That's what they're paying for. Yeah. Those clients don't want what the neighbor down the street has. And they want to sit down and spend the personal time with you, talking through the details. And they don't even want that same window that the guy has down the street. It doesn't matter how much it costs. They want it custom. Yeah. It's like on the similar end of the spectrum at the shop. We've looked at, it's like, do we get a robotic welding arm? Well, it's for mass production is when you see the efficiencies in it, because you have to set it up and let it run and produce like multiples of the same. But when every other part is different, it doesn't make sense on a scale for us to do that. And it's the same in the kind of projects that we're all working on, is like all the details are unique and it's not mass produced. And so I think it takes a lot longer to creep like up market. But down market, at the mass level, I think that's where it makes sense. And it does allow you to get more diversity into typology than you would see otherwise.
And that's all AI is a regurgitation off of what you put into it. So there's not innovation that's coming out of it. It's just an amalgamation of what's already existing. So there's not really innovation that's in that. In law, a lawyer used AI to be able to go look up case studies, and he got caught. He asked AI, and then he submitted it to the court, and it was wrong.
Oh my
it was
God.
wrong. It completely made up these cases, and he got into big trouble about it. I don't know. I think that you like we keep saying, you have to use it as a tool, and I like the big ideas. I like the new stuff. We had the last episode. A guy that's using 3D printers to be able to make stuff, like the idea of a subdivision that's made using robots to build these concrete houses is like, it's like a whole new like level of something. It's a innovation of something and pushing it into the future. I think that's way more fascinating than the mashup of what an AI thing can do, conceptually at least.
We're doing lentils on those.
Come again?
We're doing lentils on those.
Oh, right on. Do you know Nathan?
I don't know if I know him specifically or not. I don't know that we work together, but I have worked with those guys a good amount.
He said, and I saw it. Did you see it? They're doing 2 stories now.
Yeah,
they got the robots with the tracks.
They're
and
just
huge, like I wonder what it takes to like get the job site going to be able to set that thing up. But
I don't know. Yeah, maybe that's an episode, for another time. That is interesting. Like how they even get started, and how to lay the groundwork for that. Yeah, that's pretty wild.
Yeah, it's a fun process to watch start to finish, and how fast
you just watched it. You've seen it.
Oh yeah, and how fast that text developed. We set columns on the first house that they printed over on the east side, like the real like house 0, the Lake Plato house they call house 0, but that was a few prints down the road. But yeah, watching the evolution, even just like in the printers and all that technology that goes into that, but it's also hugely capital intensive to get that up in the ground, like, off the ground and running, but just a really rapid evolution in 4 years, 5 years, from where it started to where it is now.
Well received.
So yeah, it's a whole different like type of construction altogether. It's really a blending of like construction and tech, and a lot of overlap there.
So tell me, like, how did Drophouse come about? Like you started in naval architecture, you went all over. How did Drophouse come about, and what does that even mean? Like, what is Drophouse?
I mean, it really started because I couldn't get an architecture job. It's kind of the sad truth of it. Like
the world gets.
I graduated at a rough time, and there weren't architecture jobs to be had. I had lots of interviews. Like I looked for work up in Chicago, here, New Orleans, kind of all over the place. But I could find fabrication work, and I had been involved in another fab shop, and so I knew just a little bit, just enough to get myself in trouble about the business. And when we got back from India, I sent out a bunch of applications, and it's great because there's a lot of architecture firms I've worked with since then. And so the first job we would do with them, I would love to pull up like an old email when I was like looking for a job. And when they've reached out, I did this a couple of times. And I would just reply on that thread where I didn't get the job and just be like, oh yes, we would love to look at this job.
That's brilliant.
And I get it. I've had the same thing happen to me. There's a couple of people that walked in the door looking for a job that now are wildly successful on their own, and I just think like your path kind of needs to take you where you need to go. One of the partners at Millscale, the barbecue pits, like he applied for a job at the shop back in the day, and thank God he didn't get it, because otherwise they wouldn't be doing what they are now. So it kind of works out that way sometimes. But yeah, I got back from India, applied for a few more jobs. I think I was one of 3 interviewed out of like 200 applicants, is how tight it was.
Wow.
And I didn't get it. And so I was like, all right, I rented, about 250 square feet of shop space from some old like DPW burners over on the east side. And we eventually grew to take over like half of that warehouse space. And so we moved over to our shop space on 12th Street. And we just kind of clawed it up on like odd jobs. In the beginning, it was a lot of furniture, a lot of smaller pieces. Mm-hmm. And then just eventually started doing commercial and residential, and then expanded into like structural, started doing slightly bigger architectural stuff. But it really was born out of necessity. I had to work. I had jobs lined up where I could do fabrication, but not architecture. So I said, okay, well, let's make a run at it. And there was a lot of time in the early years I spent bartending. Cater bartended, my partner bartended with me, and we just did what we could to make ends meet. Put a lot of material on the personal credit card so we could make payroll, which we've never missed. Like, it just was growing the business up. Every time we got a check, we, pay off the employees and then put it in a pile towards new equipment. And just slowly grow our way up. and we didn't debt finance, until we were maybe 5 years in. I think the first thing we ever debt financed was like the forklift. That was like $2,500.
Dude.
So we just kind of just rolled the money back into the business and really wasn't taking anything out of it. In the first couple of years, we were using other means to kind of support ourselves while that was going on. And then really it was after my daughter was born, my wife looked at me and she's like, okay, either you full-time this and you make it work, you make enough money to, support your half of this, or you put it down right now. So it's like, okay, gave up the bartending and just like committed full-time, and it was a lot of 80, 90-hour weeks, just kind of slogging it out.
But that means she trusted in you. You had the ability to make this beautiful thing that you've made. Like she didn't tell you like go do something else. She told you like
she supported you.
Go
infinitely, and she held down the steady for a while, and she got back into architecture. Probably about a year after me, because she was doing basically client management for a year, and then got into architecture. Her rise has been even quicker than mine. I mean, she's partner at Chioco, and she's president of AIA this year. Like, she got into the game later and rose faster. Like, so she has a confidence in spades. Unfortunately, she had it in me and in us as well. And she had enough to look at me and be like, hey, go all in on this. Because if you don't, it's never really going to get off the ground like you want it to. And so we did. We doubled down on it, and fortunately, it worked out.
That's awesome. And it seems like you also, we were talking about this later, or first time that we met. You grew to a point that you got too big, so you found out what size of a company you want to have, like how much you want to control, and how much you want your operations to be at Drophouse.
There's definitely a sweet spot to it, and we definitely went through a couple of different periods of growth and some growing pains along the way. Because one thing I've found is that there's a good like small size shop where you can kind of exist as like a 4 to 8 person fabrication shop, and that works pretty well. And then there's like a really awkward middle size where you're like 8 to 15, or somewhere in that range, where once you start getting onto some more commercial jobs, you're not just doing residential, the commercial schedules are more aggressive, the payment terms are worse. Commercial clients typically are like our worst paying clients. The big GCs, because you'd be sitting there holding, an invoice for 180 days. Yeah. It's like, look, I'm the little guy. I don't want to finance your project. I know you have cash. I don't care if the client paid you or not, but I completed the work. I would like to get paid out. And so, we also realized you couldn't just add like an employee. You had to add a crew and enough equipment to be able to take on another job of that size. That meant adding 3 people, enough welding capacity, overhead, enough shop space, overhead, exactly. And at the same time, your insurance is going up, because then all of a sudden your gross is up a little bit. So then your overhead's driving up your costs a little bit. So you're not as cost competitive as that 4 to 8 guy shop. You can't compete with the smaller shop, but you're struggling to stay afloat because you can't take enough work at that middle size to even out the humps. Yeah. You're either all in it or you're not, and you really need to be keeping a few of those larger jobs in the queue to level out the crest. Because then too, it was about cash flow. It was like, hey, we got to go buy all this material for this bigger job, unless I have another check like to cover. So then you really want a few more jobs to kind of even it out, because the turn cycle is compared to like from the GC side, where say you've got a project that's spanning 3 years, 4 years, depending on what it is. If it's commercial, maybe it's a year. Ours are much quicker turn cycles, but the spikes are big. We're just chunking out on material, and it's not like we'll get a big check and then we're dividing it between, a handful of subs. It's okay, we got to go buy, X amount of material, and let's go wipe out that whole deposit. So we need to have a couple of jobs in varying states going on at the same time. So we realized that was kind of a sketchy place to be, but we didn't know it was bad until we were in it. So we're like, okay, well, let's grow right through it. And we kind of overshot out the backside and just kind of kept going. And we're like, okay, well, let's keep adding. And we got up to like 35 people. And we're like, man, this is so much overhead. And it was the same time we also kind of moved everybody off at 1099 and onto payroll. And we started paying half everybody's benefits. And so it was just really expensive, year in particular. There was a big commercial job we were working on. And back then we would do every scope we could get our hands on. A commercial restaurant, we'd have like 45 different items in that space. And some of them you're making money on, some you're not. And you're running like a 10-man crew to hit all these scope items. And it was tough to keep all those employees busy all the time. And then you're at that level where you kind of need like mid-level management, which we really wanted to avoid. And so we just kind of let attrition take over and bring us back down to around 25, narrow down the number of projects we work on, the type of projects we work on. That's around the same time we let go of woodwork and just focused on steel work. And we're able to get more selective on the project typology. So a good example is like ATX Cocina. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that restaurant.
Yes.
But other than the flooring in there, if it's wood or steel, like we did it. The furniture, the barrel vault, all the cabinetry. That one had like.
Have you seen it?
No, I haven't.
The wood in there's a barrel vault, and there the wood turns. It's like a crashing wave. Like
the rifles over the ceiling.
Take your wife there, man. Oh my god.
Okay.
It's like 3 miles, 1x2 pine on the ceiling.
I think
It's insane amount.
Adrian's going to try to pull it up. You said it ATX Cocina?
Yeah.
He'll try to pull up some pictures of it.
But I mean, we touched every surface in there.
Really?
Yeah. And then when we got to Commodore a couple of years later, we did the furniture and the big doors and like the concierge desk. And so it just got a lot more selective on what we did.
Whoa. Dude, that is wild.
The lighting, the hemlock, the screen wall at the back, the banquettes, the back bar. Like I said, I think that we had like 40 or 45 scope items on that job.
Dude, that's gorgeous.
That's badass.
Thanks.
You did all the woodworking.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
But yeah, then we kind of put it down like after that, and we're like, we're better at steel. The margins we were making, our ability at it.
But I like that you took that on, though.
It was.
I like that. I like that about you. I'm sorry. I mean, look at that. That was gorgeous.
I mean, that's one of the projects I am most proud of, and I miss the woodwork. On certain days, like definitely nice things about wood and nice things about steel, and I really enjoyed being able to play in both. And especially early on, it helped us on a lot of jobs when we would take the full scope. But like we even did like the paint grade cabinetry in there, and it was hard to be competitive on the paint grade cabinetry when we're also doing, water jet, black and steel finish. There's just like such a range there that we needed to narrow it a little bit to.
That's gorgeous. All the shelves, like the shelves.
Like I said, everything but the floor.
Look at that rain vault, how the wood meets each other.
That's phenomenal.
But yeah, so it was around the time we wrapped that one that we're like, okay, we need to condense it a little bit and find some focus and scale back a little bit. And a lot of it, so like my partner Matt and I can be involved in all the projects, be able to touch them all. Because once we were that larger size, it was hard to be involved in everything. And we really want to be involved in everything from the details to the installation and the finish out.
Do you feel like you're crafting a culture? I hate to use that word. It's the best one I can think of with these people that that are working for you, that they're understanding what they're doing, that you've got your fingerprint on them, and that they're growing in a capacity in which like you might want to be back at a larger amount of employees than what you have right now. Like, do you feel like you're going to always have the incessant need to be able to have you and Matt's involvement with every project, or do you think that that's something that you can at one point know that you're of a like mind, that your product's going to go out with somebody else that you've molded into what you want?
I mean, I think to some extent, and there are some projects. There's definitely, like, we have people that have been with us now long enough where there's certain projects that go out. It's like, oh, I don't need to be there. I don't want to see that, or I don't need to necessarily. A lot of it's just the part of the business that I enjoy. So I have an awesome partner in Matt Satter, who takes care of the business side of it and largely runs the design office, and I'm more involved in the shop in the field. I maybe spend like 15% of my time in the office, and I don't really want to spend much more than that.
Yeah.
And so a lot of it's slightly selfish. I like to be out in the field doing this. Like, this is why I got into it. Is because
it's not
this
selfish
is what
to take what you want.
Yeah, but being involved in the projects because I enjoy it, not because I have to. And there also is what we've been doing is moving on to bigger and bigger scale projects as opposed to more projects. So we've ramped the scale up, and so basically you're dealing with fewer clients. There's fewer issues you got to work through in the office and logistics, but the scale of the projects has gone up. And so as we've done that, like, I've enjoyed increasing that, and I could see growing it that way more so than just wholesale, like, number of projects again. And we've definitely over the years kind of changed the scale of project typology we take on. In the early days, it was like, oh, $500 project, great. And that kind of floor for what made sense to move through the shop has gradually moved upwards. We're doing a lot of operable stuff, like the big guillotine doors we did in Atlanta. And those are really nice because, those can end up taking over, a portion of the year. It's not just in the wash. It's a large enough project.
What is it? What's that, Atlanta?
So we did some.
Those. This is that big commercial project where they're like these giant. Sorry, I don't want to interrupt you.
No, go for it.
Giant guillotine doors that, right? They all slide up, and did you design all the mechanics and everything that go into that?
So we work with the engineer. There's a kinetic engineer we work with on a lot of that stuff, who's out of Seattle. And so either we'll get projects that he's looked at, or we'll hire him to kind of backside check some of the stuff we do. But they're 15 foot tall, 30 foot wide.
Holy shit.
For commercial space.
They're massive, these doors.
They weigh about 7,500 pounds a piece, and they're hand cranked. So in the superstructure that supports them is about 35 feet tall. We had about 40 ton of steel that we fabricated here, flew up to in Atlanta.
So Olsen Kundig is the architect. Okay.
Yeah.
I was like, it sounds like an Olsen Kundig.
Yeah, that was definitely an Olsen Kundig. But that one, was a really nice project for us. It was about a $750,000 job, but it was basically a pair of doors. So that's one client that we have to, like, deal with. But that's a good size. It keeps the shop busy, keeps my install crew busy. I think I had 5 or 6 trips to Atlanta, and we'll go up for a week at a time and install chunks of it, wait for them to catch up and do that. So really bringing up the scale of the project type as opposed to just more projects.
Yeah.
So more projects is more clients, more details and logistics. And so there's some of those growing into those bigger style projects has been fun because it gives us the advantage to grow without having to add a whole lot of oversight or a whole lot of mid-level to it.
And it seems like you guys, you cut your teeth. You had to do what you had to do to be able to have basically proof of concept of your company. You showed your value and what you could. ATX Cosina, what you guys can do. And so I love that you're at the moment where you can select what you want to work on and use the 80-20 principle where you're saying, I want to focus more on the bigger jobs and be able to double down on that instead of having these one-offs, and I think you'll be more impactful that way too. I mean, I think you'll know that you're going down the right road. I don't know. I just appreciate the work.
I mean, that was a big part of it, is that in the beginning, it's like, okay, I feel like I can do this work, but then you don't realize how much is selling that you can do that work. It's a way higher percentage starting a business than I think a lot of people realize. It's like, oh, I can weld, I can fabricate, I can work, I can do all this stuff, but you end up spending so much time looking for clients, trying to build the brand, trying to do all those things, that's even more important than your actual ability just in the beginning. Because it doesn't matter if you can do it or not. Like, you have to convince people of that fact. You have to get out there, get in front of people, get the work out there. And so, especially early on, so much time was put towards that, and invested in growing and like building the business, building the brand, convincing people. One great question I got, we worked on this project up in Leander. It's this big fake water tower outside of a development out there, and the GC wanted to swing by the shop. And I've had a couple early GCs swing by the shop at certain points. And he came by the shop and he's like, man, this thing is bigger than your shop. Where are you going to build it? And we're like, yeah, we have some friends with a laydown lot, so we're going to do it over there. And we ended up building it in the driveway. And there's some old pictures out there, and it looked like the Death Star, because we built this thing on its side, and it basically was a big tube frame, and we had steam bent oak staves on it to make it look like an old school barrel. But I think it was 10 or 12 feet in diameter.
Oh my God.
And about 15 to 18 feet tall. We just had the thing on its side in the driveway.
And what is this?
It's a big signage piece for a development up in Leander.
Wow.
But yeah, GC was like, where are you going to build this? I don't know if you have room for this.
Oh my God.
Those are future Christian problems.
Yeah. Well, why don't you let us worry about it?
Right.
Like, we'll get it done. So yeah, we built it in the driveway on 12th Street, and everybody just walked past it for a long time. But we pulled it off, and that was a lot of it. It's like, we had confidence in what we could do, but we had to convince other people that we could do that. And those are the projects that excite me, the ones that are like that next level up and that next level kind of beyond that. And like I said, the challenging ones, I know we're not, like, we were never the best like mill workers are in town. We're not the best brass patina finish guy in town. But if the job looks like it's super hard to pull off, and you sit there scratching and you're like, I have no idea how somebody would do this. We're like, I don't know how to model it. Like, I don't know how we would install it. Like, all those kinds of things. I'm like, those are the jobs.
That's a crazy business model.
I really enjoy, because those are the ones that like challenge us to grow.
Yeah.
And like every time we were able to take on a new one of those and grow. And so, yeah, we're not like the highest level, like in this, like we do occasionally do like stainless work, but we're not known for it. We've never wanted to be like, I want to be the best finisher, like this thing. It's like, no, I want the job that looks crazy, and people have to be like, how did they do that? Yeah. And those are the ones that I'm like, yeah, I want that.
That is
job.
awesome. That is so cool.
So,
Man in the arena.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, man in the arena. I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, that was a earlier episode that we had talking about.
I heard that. I like that, like, take on it. And I mean, you can't be afraid to go after that stuff.
No, absolutely not. Gosh, where would we be if people like you didn't exist? Afraid to take risks and afraid to get out there and put themselves out there.
From his wife just saying, go all in on it. Like, thank you.
And that kind of speaks to me, because my parents they've been small business owners for probably almost 40 years. They work in Houston. They have a sweeping company, and it was a very similar start for them, where it was they were dead broke. They decided early on, like, this is either going to sink or swim. So it's either we're gonna make this work. And yeah, a lot of working two to three jobs, you know, to make ends meet and you know, to pay the employees and whatnot. And they just started. So like I said, they have a parking lot sweeping company, and it started from just a broom and a dustpan, and you know, and you build up and you save and you buy the next piece of equipment, and then that allows you to get more work, and then you save and buy the next, you know, sweeper truck, and that allows you to expand and grow from there. And it was all like everything they made just went right back into the company. There was nothing extra. And so I think it was what you were saying about how kind of Drophouse formed and you know, the role that your wife had in supporting you was definitely similar to what my parents were going through when they were starting their company.
Which is viable, and it's on your own fruition. It's on somebody
Yeah.
else's dollars, and the future hope that it'll work. It'll work on by your sweat equity. Yeah,
Absolutely.
Yeah,
beautiful.
I think you can put enough of it in there, and it wasn't because I was particularly good. A lot of it is because I just pushed and put the effort into it, and you know, I think if you have that grit to do it, to put in that time and just like give it all back to it and nurture it, that you know, get it off the ground, that and a bit of luck.
What challenges do you see maybe in the future, you know, as far as labor is concerned? Do you see a lot of young guys coming in and wanting to take over and kind of learn what you know, and who's willing to study, you know, what you know and understand? I mean, do you see a lot of young guys coming in, or what do you see any problems?
I think we're pretty lucky in that we get a good mix.
Okay.
Coming in, I think we get an interesting array like across the spectrum. Just because we are a little more like architectural focused than say some of the steel shops.
Yeah.
Like we've got a new employee starting Monday who's very much the same lineage as like my partner and I, except he's probably closer aligned to me, where he's coming out of architecture school. He kind of didn't want to go the traditional office route. He's done some fabrication, and now he wants to like do this. And so the tough part is we get a lot of people that are really in love with the idea. And then when the actual, like you throw them in the shop, you know, it works out sometimes, it doesn't work others. You know, which is also, but we've been lucky to find people when we need them and also when we don't need them. And so we tend to grab good people when they walk in the door, and we've never really hired for positions. Like we hire for attitude and, you know, is there a skill set that fits in? As long as it fits in somewhere in the umbrella, it's not like I'm hiring a shop manager or I'm hiring a field installer.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, if I like this person and we look at it and we're like, where are we at overall? Can we squeeze it in? You know, because there's just like natural attrition, like people move on. One of our long timers, he'd been with us almost 7 years. Just went up to Michigan. And so, yeah, we were replacing that. But when people come along that we're like, oh man, you would be a great fit here, we try and put them in, knowing that people just through the natural cycle, you know, will move in and out. And just try and build the crew that way, because attitude is the biggest thing. You can teach a skill set, and finding people that are interested in it has been less of a problem. And there's definitely like ups and downs.
Yeah.
You know, we'll go through periods where like, oh, I wish I had like a little bit more at the top, or you know, we need a couple of just like fabricators, like we need some more skill in. But yeah, the bigger picture stuff, you know, is like when for Matt and I to really like step back and have somebody kind of take over that like upper level, like total management kind of stuff. That's a little more difficult, like seeing that in the long term. There's a couple of people that we've got now that we're trying to, you know, see where it flushes out and if they want to grow into that. But yeah, as far as like a lack of like new people coming into the trade side of things, we get a decent amount of people coming from school back into the trade from architecture, that it kind of backfeeds that, especially in the early days. almost everybody in the shop was like an architecture fabricator, which is cool because it fit the design build model really well. And so, yeah, that was really helpful in the beginning because everybody could draw their own project and then they could walk out in the shop and they could weld on it. And it was a really nice mix. And as we got a little bigger, it got a little harder.
Yeah.
But yeah, and we have had to diversify a little bit, like getting people that like know the technology side of it.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's like occasionally we'll go head hunting for like a good finisher, you know, that kind of stuff. But I do think we've been lucky. I don't see that as like across the board.
Sure.
You know, if I were a tile setter or a plumber, like I don't think it would be as easy to find people coming up.
Any mashup with a wife? Do you guys ever collaborated and thought of a business model to make I guess she's doing well in her realm, you're doing well in yours, I guess.
Yeah, I mean we kind of kicked it around like here and there, and it's nice because we'll work on a project here and there. She was at Shoes Office when we did Cocina.
Cool.
And like I said, she's partnered with Yoko now, so we've done like a couple things together, and that's a nice space because she has her space, I have mine, and then like, occasionally we overlap. So we did kick their idea around for like a bit, but it's nice, and it's especially because like her and Jamie have this nice synergy that like my partner and I have, which like dividing like all the headaches of the business to me is the best thing that ever happened.
It's a beautiful marriage. You're with a business partner, yeah.
Yeah, I have a lot of people who be like, man, I don't know how you could do it with a partner. And I look at them and I'm like, I don't know how you could do it without.
Yeah.
Just being able to divide that stuff, you know, especially in the early days when it was like, man, we need to be booking new work. Meanwhile, we're installing this. And so I'm totally focused on this, but I can't be thinking about lining up the next contract. And you really need more of that continuity in the early days, especially at that like medium size, to kind of grow through that. When you're a real small shop, you can kind of work your way through it.
Where did he come from?
Architecture.
Okay.
He was at LSU as well. He was doing his undergrad there while I did my grad degree. And we actually met in India. So we didn't know each other beforehand.
That's interesting.
But yeah, so there was 5 of us that went over and taught at that same university. And so we all became really good friends. And I got back to here, and he got back to Louisiana, and I called him up one day. It was like a month in. I was like, hey, what are you doing? He's like, nothing. You know, the market was garbage. I was like, you want to come hang out over here and give me a hand with this? And it wasn't like, hey, you want to come be my partner? I was like, hey, if you got nothing better to do, like, and it worked out. It clicked, and it almost immediately became clear. Okay, you take over this portion, and I'll work on this, and yeah. So
it's the fighting the dog, man. It's not. It's nothing more than that. It's Christian. You'd kill it in anything that you did. Like you're.
I don't know about that, but I appreciate it. You know, I was dumb enough to slog it out in this. So yeah, I think you just with anything, you just keep pushing on it long enough, and you know, as long as you know you're halfway decent, like you get somewhere.
Yeah.
You know, it just takes a lot of grit, and then you add a little bit of skill and luck on top of that, and you make it sing. But yeah, I think the biggest part is just like digging deep and doing it. You know, spending the time, putting the hours in.
Well, so what do you like to do in the off time? Who are you outside of Drophouse? What are some of your hobbies? Tell us about yourself.
You saw how I got sidetracked by that international out front on the way in. Yeah, I have a small, ugly collection of cars at the shop.
What do you have?
So, 77 FJ40, 69 Baja Bug.
Okay.
There's like a 72 VW sand rail.
Those are harder to find now.
And then the 2007 Humvee. So yeah, love like the scale. Oh, and a couple of bikes. So, but yeah, I love tinkering on cars. I'm absolutely awful at it. I like the build out after their running phase of working on them, the little trick detail kind of phase. But you ask me what's wrong with that motor, I'm not very good at that part of it. But yeah, and then there's some guys that I crew for, and we go. The owner has a spec trophy truck that he races down in Baja. So I was just supposed to be down there for the 500, and they canceled that trip. So I think the next one I'm going down for is the 1,000. The sand rail down in Mexico. So it's got an 87 Jetta motor that a local made an adapter plate to the bus trans. So it still runs all the VW parts. So that one's waiting for me, like down in Baja when we go down there. I like to, it's kind of shop adjacent.
Sure.
You have this whole shop full of tools and things you can fiddle with. So, and then a couple of spaces store some extra cars. So it's like working on this stuff, and it's frustrating and gratifying all at the same time. I was thinking about earlier on the way over here.
The way you put that, it's frustrating and gratifying. That's so true.
Especially the bug. We would go out and rip that thing around the back nine and break it. And then we'd be like, okay, we got to fix that before we can drive it next time. And so we'd spend like 2 hours fixing whatever we broke the last time. And then we'd have like, oh man, we got 40 minutes before we got to be home. So we'd finally get it fixed. And we'd be able to make 2 or 3 laps, celebrate, and break something else until the next time. It was just kind of like, but I love the scale of cars versus like buildings. There's something gratifying about that smaller scale. And it's still design related, but slightly different, and just the kind of mechanical nature of those things, even though I'm awful at it. That's one thing I really want to learn. But I think it's like anything else. You just kind of have to dive into it, and it's experience.
Yep.
He's been doing it for how many years now, and it's just like, put in the hours. What is it? 10,000 hours to master anything, or achieve like base level mastery of it, and just gotta do it and do it wrong for a long time until you get it right.
Yeah. Once you figure out along the way how much you like it, if you put 10,000 in,
yeah, that's the tough part. You gotta kind of commit and then just be like, all right, well, you get to the end of that 10, you're like, no, this isn't for me.
You either learn it for necessity or desire.
Exactly.
What is it? 2080 is a year, so Drophouse was 2017. You put in your 10,000 hours, so you're 23, so you've doubled that, so you're more than a master. You're a double master at what you do.
Well, Christian, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I really appreciate you giving your time and coming on the show. We really need to get you back on. I appreciate your time. Absolutely great conversation. Mark, do you have anything you want to?
No, man, appreciate it. Big fanboy. Yeah.
Thank you guys for having me. So, hopefully we get to chat a little bit more next time. I want to hear about what you guys are into.
We'll have to set up a time and do this again, but it's been a pleasure. It's been great to get to know you. So, Christian.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.